As the dust settles, it appears the legacy media have their minds made up on Ole Miss despite a masterful performance.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, the most watched Ole Miss podcast around. I am your host, Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media and a former Ole Miss staff member. On today's show, we talk about Cayden Lee and TJ Dottery's impressive and confident appearances at SEC Media Days. Two players that showed the great poise and leadership that should excite every single Ole Miss fan. But before we dive into that, we break down how the national media continues to penalize Ole Miss for a perceived underachievement in 2024. Despite 3 10-win seasons, legacy media remains hesitant to give Lane Kiffin and the Rebels the benefit of the doubt entering 2025. We'll talk about what all that means and why it could fuel another strong run this fall. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day. And a special hello to the insiders and everydayers who make this show what it is. Do us a favor, like, subscribe, and comment on this video. It costs absolutely nothing, but keeps everything free on this site. And don't forget to check out a second listen on the network. Nearly every team, college and pro, is ready for you. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when that first $5 bet wins, only at FanDuel. So it was really interesting, and I was sitting back waiting to react and to see how yesterday and the day before with Ole Miss going in front of the media at SEC Media Days would be handled by the national media. I went on to CBS Sports and looked there. They even had a story about Vanderbilt, but nothing about Ole Miss, nothing about Austin Simmons, Cayden Lee. The people inside the building for Ole Miss, the SEC Network with Laura Rutledge or Peter Burns and Chris Doering and just about everybody that has an opinion, they're not willing to give Ole Miss the benefit of the doubt of what happened a year ago. Lane Kiffin even started his speech talking about 3 10-win seasons in 4 years. He talked about Ole Miss having the third most SEC wins of anybody other than Georgia and Alabama. The legacy media still refuses to give Ole Miss the benefit of the doubt. Austin Simmons coming in, that's a bridge too far for a team to replace. But Arch Manning, he's a Heisman frontrunner, even though he is replacing a quarterback. The benefit of the doubt normally reserved for Georgia, Alabama, and Texas, and LSU, and Tennessee, and to some extent, Texas A&M. Ole Miss does not get that. And it's weird that the legacy media is still trying to relitigate 2024. Yes, I know you went out on a limb in 2024 about Ole Miss in the playoff. Ole Miss had the best roster potentially in college football. Ole Miss choked in 2024. It's not that Ole Miss was not good enough. There was just some flaws that were unable to be overcome. Some unexpected things popped up, like the Quinshon Judkins. If Quinshon Judkins stays at Ole Miss is likely in the national championship game, if we're going to be honest. If Ole Miss plays the game as a favorite, Ole Miss is likely in the playoffs. There are several ways that Ole Miss could have made the playoffs in a very narrow way for them not to make it, and they happened to hit that narrow way. But the people that went out predicting Ole Miss because Ole Miss rightfully had that roster are now at a point where they won't predict Ole Miss at all. Roman Harper and Jordan Rogers, which are two of my favorite analysts at the SEC Network, they're talking about LSU and Alabama and Georgia, the usual suspects for the Southeastern Conference title. And then at the very bottom of the screen, the graphic at the bottom of the screen where they list the top 6 SEC teams that could make the playoffs, they listed Ole Miss as a 1-in-3 chance to make the college football playoff this year. Yet there is no discussion from legacy media on that. The analytics absolutely love Ole Miss. They do. The analytics are absolutely in love with Ole Miss. The only people that are not in love with Ole Miss are people that are a little bit butthurt over 2024. They want to relitigate that. They want Ole Miss to pay for it. Laura Rutledge yesterday on her show, while they're doing SEC Media Days, had Lane Kiffin on there. They all kind of ganged up on Lane to almost get him to admit that 2024 was his fault. Lane obviously doesn't think of wins and losses the same way everybody else does, for better or worse. But they wanted their pound of flesh from Lane Kiffin for 2024. They talked about the players that left Ole Miss and how do you replace those. Lane was calm and confident. He obviously likes this roster. He is a huge fan of what this team could be. He came into SEC Media Days chirping. That should put everybody on notice of what he thinks this team could be. But the legacy media were wanting to relitigate 2024 when he was ready to talk about the 2025 season, NIL, the playoff, the whole 9 yards. Later on in the day, I don't know if Ole Miss went to Paul Feinbaum or Paul Feinbaum went to Ole Miss, but Lane Kiffin, before they popped out to go back to Oxford, he did an appearance on the Paul Feinbaum show. It was a very good appearance. The chemistry of those two is just really good. They've kind of set that up over spring meetings and SEC Media Days in years past. But Paul Feinbaum was quick to admit that 2024 was Lane's fault. So why should they think that Ole Miss can do something in 2025 if 2024 happened? And people that supposedly know ball, and that's what these people that are at SEC Media Days are, people that supposedly know ball. And yet they take these lazy takes of trying to bring forward the 2024 team, even in the age of the transfer portal, where you cannot go linearly with college sports. You can't. If you try to go literally, you are going to make a fool out of yourself eventually. That's the way this works. This season, as we've talked about for 3 years on this show, this team is about the team. It's not about last year's team. It's not about the year before team. The rules for kind of figuring out a good college football team, it's not as easy as it used to be when Alabama and Texas and Georgia could stockpile recruits before the age of the NIL and the transfer portal. All of that changed fundamentally how you view a college football team as far as a predictive metric. Listen, the one thing that everybody has in front is, does the team have a returning quarterback? That's probably the most important metric out there. But you know what? Garrett Nussmeier is not in the top 3 in LSU. South Carolina is not in the top 3. Teams that are replacing their quarterback, the most important position on the field, is in there. So these people that supposedly know ball, their job is to know ball, are just putting brands at the top of the rankings. The Georgia, Alabama, and Texas, they'll figure it out. Even though there's a new quarterback, new offensive line, new wide receivers at Texas, there's far more of a chance for it going badly than going well at Texas in 2025. That's just the way it is. Georgia, I like Gunnar Stockton, but there still is those questions. The running back, the offensive line, did they fix that? Alabama, is Ty Simpson the dude? He's not at SEC Media Days this week, so maybe he's not the dude. I really like LSU and Garrett Nussmeier. And that game in Oxford is going to be an absolute war, just like it has been over the last 2 years. Ole Miss won essentially on the last play of the game, and last year LSU won on the last play of the game. The Ole Miss-LSU rivalry has completely ignited to the point where LSU has essentially stormed the field in Tiger Stadium 3 times in the last decade after beating Ole Miss. This rivalry is where it needs to be. And those things, it's just weird. because Ole Miss had a masterful performance as SEC Media Days. Lane Kiffin was fantastic. Lane Kiffin was throwing the jabs. He was relaxed. He was comfortable. He obviously really likes this roster. And I think that's going to be the surprise. The analytics saying that Ole Miss is going to be really good. The only people that aren't necessarily buying in are the people that got burned on Ole Miss a year ago. And those guys and the media guys and guys that supposedly know ball hate being wrong. And this is just another example of that. Now, it feels like the national media wants this cute Ole Miss story to fade away. The last season clearly ruffled some feathers, and the Rebels aren't getting the benefit of the doubt from much of anybody. But that might be exactly what Lane Kiffin and his team needs. We'll talk about that next. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're about the baseball under the lights, the golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the way to make every game more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it that much more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get back in the game while your friends are getting sunburned in the beach. Last night's All-Star game, we're at the All-Star break where there's a couple of days that are just as slow as it can get at. FanDuel might have something that would interest you. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups in Ole Miss versus Georgia State. It's kind of front and center in my mind. And the Rebels at a 37-point favorite gets me ready for football. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 back in bonus bets if that first $5 bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. So the story at SEC Media Days, outside of how well Austin Simmons did and outside how well Cayden Lee and TJ Dottery did and how well Lane Kiffin did, was 2024. For anybody that doesn't do what I do, that doesn't know the storyline surrounding Ole Miss every single day, that they don't have the time to necessarily dig into Ole Miss. They kind of base things off brand, because the one advantage that I have over just about everybody is time. And I use my time pretty well, I think. I'm very efficient with what I do. There are people in the questions at SEC Media Days where that just wasn't the case. So many questions about 2024, so many questions about how Lane Kiffin is going to react about not making the playoffs in 2024, that when Ole Miss made it back to Oxford and Lane Kiffin sat down, SEC Media Days might have given Ole Miss the best gift it possibly could. And that is an Ole Miss versus the world mentality. Nobody's talking about the Rebels nationally. You go to CBS Sports, there's nothing on there. There's even a story from Vanderbilt on there. Nothing about Ole Miss, nothing about Austin Simmons. The hype going into SEC Media Days with Austin Simmons, there was the story at The Athletic. He was obviously on this show. But those players going back and going through those questions and hearing and trying to remember what was said, they can honestly have an Ole Miss versus the world mentality. And it's been a while since Ole Miss has been able to have an Ole Miss versus the world mentality. It is going to be up to Lane Kiffin to instill that mentality into the Ole Miss Rebels this season, in my opinion. Ole Miss, they need to play like the favorite. We've talked about that for a year at this point. They need to play like a favorite, throw analytics out the window, just play straight football, and you have the talent to be successful going against the other team. But they need to play with a chip on their shoulder from the very first minute that they walk in. Because like I said before, the analytics love Ole Miss. Ole Miss and LSU are side by side in just about every analytic there is. You look on ESPN, they did the top 25 coaches of the last 25 years, and Lane Kiffin's on the list. Ole Miss is in a spot that nobody is comfortable with Ole Miss being in. Let's just be honest about it. They don't want Ole Miss there. They don't want Ole Miss to be good, because if they're good, that makes it harder for them. They want Ole Miss and Mississippi State to continue to throw and mud at each other and all of that and going 6-6 every single year. That is what the rest of the conference and what, honestly, the national legacy media want to see happen. Ole Miss has a chance this season to use 2024 as a weapon, a chance to weaponize the Kentucky game. All of the negative stuff that you've heard and everybody's been focused on for the better part of the year, Ole Miss gets to use that now. Ole Miss gets to get the benefit of that horrible day in Oxford. The game where LSU won on the last play of the game, Ole Miss gets to use that. The Florida game where Jackson Dart happened to have the worst game of the season for him and Trey Harris got hurt. Ole Miss gets to weaponize that. They missed the playoffs in 2024 despite leading the SEC in scoring offense and scoring defense. Do you know how rare it is for that sentence to happen? Ole Miss gets to use all of this negativity towards Ole Miss and the want from the legacy media to put little Ole Miss back in its little old place. Ole Miss gets to use that in an Ole Miss versus the world scenario. And the talent that Ole Miss has is not like they used to have. This isn't the David Cutcliffe years. This isn't the Ed Orgeron years, the Tommy Tuberville years. This is synonymous to the Johnny Vaught years, if we're going to be honest about it. If you look at the records going on, you're going through a second golden era right now. I hope everybody is enjoying this. It's not often when you win 10 games, 3 out of 4 years, to where you can say everybody is doubting you, where you get to play that card. I mean, Kirby was able to do it. He won a national championship and had one of his linebackers said, everybody thought we were going to win 7 games. And it's like, you were preseason number 1 in the country. But Ole Miss has legitimate doubters this year. There are people very high up that think they know a lot of ball, not banking on Ole Miss this season. It's not because of talent. Talent's there. Potential is all over the chart. Ole Miss is going to likely be favored in 10 or 11 of their games this season. It's going to come down to winning the little stuff, the chip on your shoulder, everybody doubting you. If you realize that and kind of focus all of your energy towards everybody doubting you and wanting you to go away, go through this season. 5 of the first 6 games are at home. The only road game is at Kentucky. Preseason, according to Locked On College Football, number 16 in the conference. That's 6 games. You should be 6-0 when you go to Athens, Georgia, to Sanford Stadium. 2 difficult games. Oklahoma, one of the darlings of Chris Doering, and Georgia, one of the darlings of college football, if we're going to be honest. They're a good team. They're literally good. They have not lost in that stadium in like 5 years. Somebody has to beat them, though. Go over there and try it out. You have the talent to get them. You got them a year ago at home. They're going to be up for that game. Oklahoma is going to be up for that game. It's going to be very hard. But after that, you have a home game against South Carolina and a game that is an absolute must win. You have a home game against the Citadel, obviously. And you have a home game against the Florida Gators that could be for essentially all the marbles and the playoff. And then you go to Starkville for the 9th home game, according to Lane Kiffin. Ole Miss fans have a chance to take over that stadium. If they have another 10-2 type season, when deer season hits, that place is going to be pretty empty and there's going to be excellent seats available to everybody. When you look at the schedule that Ole Miss has and where they play the teams, their 2 toughest games at Georgia and at Oklahoma. They play pretty well normally at home. As long as they are consistent at home, they have a chance to be pretty good. But the legacy media doubting Ole Miss and wanting to relitigate 2024 over and over and over again, you might have just gave Ole Miss the best weapon that you could have given them. Really, really interesting stuff. And I am curious to see exactly what happens there, honestly, if we're going to be real about it. All right. Two players at the SEC Media Days, Cayden Lee and TJ Dottery. In our final segment, they made a strong impression at SEC Media Days. What did we learn from the interviews? We will break all of that down next. All right, Cayden Lee and TJ Dottery were the other two players that were SEC Media Days. We talked about Austin Simmons a little bit yesterday. We talked about Lane Kiffin yesterday extensively. He had fun. He was comfortable. It was a master class that he put on at SEC Media Days. And he can be very good in that setting. He can be very bad in that setting. And a lot of that has to do with how he feels going into that setting. And when you look at his roster going on, that is the number one concern for Lane Kiffin. It's always going to be his roster. So you're going to be a little bit more laid back when your roster is pretty good. That's just the way it works. He was laid back. He was pressureless. He was everything that you wanted the Ole Miss coach to be, and you left that game with more confidence, in that interview with more confidence than before. So it was a good day for Lane Kiffin. It was a good day for Austin Simmons. Honestly, it was a good day for Cayden Lee and TJ Dottery as well. One of the interesting things about Cayden Lee, he is really, really good friends with Austin Simmons. They go back to whenever they got to Ole Miss, I think together, and started throwing down on the lower fields when Austin Simmons was going to redshirt that year. And Cayden Lee was trying to fight his way up in the depth chart. At that point, Jordan Watkins was still playing slot receiver. Because of that, there was a little bit of a rapport that was developed between Austin Simmons and Cayden Lee. Cayden Lee goes by Honeycomb. He played on Cam Newton's 7-on-7 team. Brian Smith is a huge fan. The Florida Football Scout and the Locked On The Portal podcast. He's a huge fan of Cayden Lee. Cayden Lee sat down, said, hey, Austin Simmons, everything, we're in pretty good shape. Now, schematically, they're not giving anything away. They're told not to. That's the way it works. Basically, the only thing you get out of a press conference with Ole Miss and Ole Miss players or Lane Kiffin is the ability to ask a question about things other than schematic football that people would want to hear. But Cayden Lee was prepared. Cayden Lee was good. He's somebody that I think this season could lead the entire Southeastern Conference in receiving. That is the type of year that Cayden Lee could have. Last year, he had 0 drops, 57 catches, 800 and something yards, 2 touchdowns, played a slot position really well. Now, we remember the difference between now and last year was Jackson Dart was a 1970 style Oakland Raiders type quarterback. He was a duck and chuck guy. He wanted to throw the ball down the field. He led the nation in yards per completion. Austin Simmons isn't that guy. And you saw that in his one drive against the Georgia Bulldogs that he really focused on Cayden Lee, and they lined him up in different places. They did some interesting stuff with him. And their rapport and their relationship is going to make Deshaun Stribling a little bit better. It's going to make Harrison Wallace better. Going to make Caleb Odom better. Going to make Daquan Wright or Luke Haas better. Cayden Lee is going to make everybody in that wide receiver room better. I'm excited to see exactly how that will go. Now, another player that was at SEC Media Days is TJ Dottery. TJ Dottery is another guy who was very impressive. He's a green dot wearer on the field for Pete Golding's defense. He plays linebacker. He was the second leading tackler last year behind Chris Paul, but he was able to do a lot of the dirty work that got Ole Miss into the positions that they were wanting to be in. Him doing all of that work was a lot of the reason that defense was as good as it was. Now, everybody's going to talk about Walter Nolan and Princely and Yellen and Jared Ivey, J.J. Pegues, Chris Paul, Trey Amos, and honestly, they should. But in a fireside chat where Pete Golding sat down with Chris Beard to talk a little football, Pete Golding said he wasn't that concerned about the front seven. There wouldn't be much of a drop-off at all. And that's because of William Eccles. That's because of Jam Brown, Xavion Harris, Cam Franklin, the former 5-star. The work they've done in the transfer portal. They might not be 12 deep this year like they were a year ago, but they could be 8 deep and very good. And at linebacker, they're going to be good as well. My concern is on the back end of that defense. If you look at what's going on, TJ Dottery is going to have to be concerned with getting people lined up behind him this year. There's no Trey Washington. There's no John Saunders, quarterback in the defense from the back part. So it's going to be up to TJ Dottery to at least make sure that all of that is set up as well. Again, he was very impressive. Cayden Lee was very impressive. Austin Simmons, Lane Kiffin. It was really a masterful performance at SEC Media Days, and everybody except the legacy media that take the opportunity to kind of hopefully get Ole Miss back into their place. It was a good day for Ole Miss. Ole Miss, though, through SEC Media Days, they had their masterful performance, and they get to play Ole Miss versus the world for the entire season because of how this went down. So it should be pretty interesting for Ole Miss. So thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves on offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we're the front door of Ole Miss. If you don't believe us, check out Google Ole Miss Podcast. We are all over the page. We are the front door of Ole Miss. So don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. It helps the show stay completely free. And as we all know, free equals fun. Your support means the world to us. For a second listen, check out the Portal Show. Latest rumors, portal entries, and signings. Be the most informed fan on the rapid changes to college football's landscape. Find the Portal on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Hotty toddy, everybody. And remember, analytics is just the old English word that means bad football. We'll see you tomorrow.